Welcome into an all-new season of Daily Faceoff live. As always, we are back and streaming on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. And as always, we are brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, and he is veteran NHL goaltender Carter Hutton. No longer retired. You're back to work in 5 days a week, Huts.
That's it. I've been using that excuse with everybody now. I said I got to go back to work, but no one's giving me much sympathy on these hours, Ty. But I'm excited to be here. You know, I've been a guest co-host once in a while. I've been a guest, goalie segment, but now I'm all yours, buddy. I look forward to it.
And we got some goalie news to talk about today, but I'm very excited to have you along as my co-host for the entire season. Very excited to be looking at all of our regulars back over in the Daily Faceoff YouTube chat as well. If you got some AskDFO questions, you can throw them in there. We'll get to those later on today. A very similar show to what you've seen over the last 3 years with a couple of tweaks along the way. We're going to have a bunch of new exciting guests this year. Instead of 4 topics off the jump, we're actually going down to 3 to give us a chance to really sink our teeth into things. And yes, we will have our usual big segment as well. Today, that is going to be George Richards. But speaking of those first 3 topics, Huts, let's dig into the big one, the news that broke about 25 hours ago. Kirill Kaprizov and the Minnesota Wild agreeing to terms on a record-setting extension. It is a grand total of $136 million over the next 8 years for the Russian winger, and I'll save everybody the math. It's a $17 million AAV. That is also a record. It is a big ticket. And listen, Huts, when the news kind of broke that he had turned down an 8x16 extension, a lot of people called Kaprizov crazy, but he gets his bag.
Yeah, he got his bag. And this was one for me that they had to get done, right? They cannot lose a player like him. He needed to be there. And the fact that he waited, I guess, Ty, if I'm looking back, I didn't know if it was going to get to 17. I thought he just didn't want to be in Minnesota. I thought this was a factor of, him wanting to change places. And I guess I take that Russian quality into it. He wants to be in a big city. He wants to go somewhere else. But this is a guy that Bill Guerin was able to get it done. It changes the landscape, right? He is a player that can be a difference maker. Now what we're going to see as that moves across the board. And for him, this is a deal, obviously I think when you look at Minnesota and you look at the Suter deal, you look at the Parise deal, what happened in the past, is this something that maybe haunts them later? I think the structure is a bit different with the signing bonus. There won't be that same buyout factor. And this is something I think for the Minnesota Wild that needed to get done with their younger core of guys, right? You look at Rossi, you look at Boldy, you look at Eriksson Ek still playing a lot of great hockey. This is a good fit for them. And for a team that's been consistent, made the playoffs a ton in the last 10 years, they need something to push them over the top. And I think Billy Guerin and the Minnesota Wild needed to get this deal done.
Well, you just can't risk losing him. You have to pay the guy his money. If you let Kaprizov walk next summer and go, oh boy, we have $17 million in extra cap space now, you spend the next decade being wildly mediocre and searching for the next Kirill Kaprizov. You go back to just being the old butt of the joke, the Minnesota Mild, and you just can't run that risk. And I do think and I see it a little bit in our chat right now. People are saying it's stupid money to be giving one player. It's stupid money to be giving a winger. But I'm a firm believer, and there are good examples of this around the league. Take care of your superstars. Worry about everything else later. Look at the Florida Panthers. They have guys in the bottom of their lineup that contribute, but it's AJ Greer making $850,000. It's Thomas Nosek. Guys they pick up off waivers, off the scrap heap. They find the kind of value lower in their lineup, and then they pay all their big guns whatever they need to pay. That's what Minnesota's doing here. You're not going to regret giving the extra $2 million to Kirill Kaprizov because it kept him in Minnesota green. You're going to regret paying Yakov Trenin $3.5 million, which they are right now. And he scored 7 goals last year. I just really don't think you ever regret giving stars the money.
And I think you always talk about that, right? We talk about stars and players taking discounts for the team. But just if he takes a few million less, doesn't mean the team is going to disperse that properly, or it's going to go to someone where it's really going to help this squad. At the end of the day, we know this league is built on superstars, and he is a guy that can play on all sides of the puck. He is a giant difference maker for this Minnesota Wild. And we look at some other teams and we talk about, superstars getting paid, and, we're going to get into that, how does this affect the market? But there really isn't anybody else in Minnesota as the guy. So he is the guy where it's going to be very hard to replace. And they're going to have some things that they have to kick down the road. You look at Philip Gustafson, what he's going to demand, right? You look at the Spencer Knight contract, the Dustin Wolf. They have to get him signed as well moving forward. But this was the guy that they needed to get done. And I think for me, the fact of the matter is the sooner the better. And I think the time was in the favor of for him other than the team. Because if it gets kicked down the road on Kaprizov not signing, now he starts to look at other teams and what they're willing to give him. And then it starts to get a little bit muddy in that sense. So this is a good deal. It's a lot of money, but this is something we're going to have to get used to. This is the new age NHL, and we're going to see big numbers all the time.
Totally. Kaprizov, one of the most productive players over the last 3 seasons when you go by points per game. He's 7th in the NHL. When you go by total points, he drops all the way down to the 30s, and that's because he hasn't stayed in the lineup. Like, I mean, Pat, I don't know if we have that board ready to go, but Kaprizov's 7th in points per game, and you look at the games missed by these other top-end players, like Austin Matthews is a guy who's always getting the label of being injury-prone, can't stay healthy. He's missed 24 games over the last 3 seasons. Kaprizov's missed 63 games over the last couple of years. Like, in terms of holding up his end of the bargain, he's got to stay in the lineup.
Yeah, he has to. And that's going to be a big factor. You look at last year, a guy who was in the Hart conversations until he got hurt. So, when you see those numbers paired up against the other big guns in the league, this is going to be a big difference maker for this Minnesota Wild down the stretch. But now having him locked up and knowing that you have the depth for me, Ty, I think this is where you really manage him, right? You know what he needs. He's been there long enough to have him peaking at the right times. We hear this all the time when we talk about the Florida Panthers. We're going to have a guest on after. They know how to peak at the right time. They're conditioned for the playoffs, and that's going to be important for this Minnesota Wild, knowing that they have their star locked up and he doesn't have to worry about that looming contract over his head.
Yeah, totally. So now that Kaprizov's locked up, a lot of eyes turning to their big names around the NHL. And before we talk about the McDavids and the Eichels and the Kempes and the Kyle Connors and the list goes on, let's talk about the deal that got done earlier this morning. Luke Hughes and the New Jersey Devils agreeing to terms on what I would describe as a jaw-dropping contract. Luke Hughes, just 2 years into his NHL career, gets a 7-year deal with a $9 million AAV, one that kind of makes you just shake your head and open your eyes and go like, holy shit, they paid him what? But at the same time, Hutz, you kind of look around the league and like, this is what guys like Jake Sanderson and other young defensemen have kind of got. Like, you're taking a risk, but I always say the only way to get value down the line is to take the plunge now when you have a young player like Hughes.
Yeah, this is, for my time, when I look back at my time in Nashville, and we would lock up Roman Josi, Ekholm, Ellis, all these guys had those long-term deals where you're betting on that future, right? There is that risk, but for Luke Hughes, he's a guy that, there's a lot of upside to his game. And again, I don't think it's going to get any cheaper as it moves forward. I think right now, Lane Hutton is probably sitting at home licking his chops, seeing this contract come across the board. And it's going to change the landscape, right? It's the same as a Kaprizov contract. There's going to be different. There's a little more holes in his game. But I think for him, what I look at for Luke Hughes is the fact that there's maturity. And I think the holes in his game are, he tends to turn the puck over a little bit. He's still a great skater. He possesses it. He's a great passer. So there's a lot of high qualities in his game. The fact of the matter is, I think the Devils, what they think is over time, he's going to develop with experience, right? We don't see a lot of D-men, really fine-tune those parts of their game until they get the maturity. So we're betting on that, and the Devils need to win, right? The Metro is a division that's very open. You look at Carolina, they're kind of the team that I think will be the favorites, but the Devils are right there, and it's wide open if you have a good season to get to that conference final.
It is. I do think the East is open. We'll do some more preview stuff over the next few days on the show, but Luke Hughes, that is, 12th highest AAV amongst defensemen. In his 2 years in the league, though, he's been 21st in points. Like, ultimately, I know there's always going to be the defensive blips with a young player, and people will try to poke holes in his game. Love that you brought up Lane Hutson as well, by the way, because if this guy's getting 9, Lane Hutson's getting 12 or 13 on his first deal, I think. But Luke Hughes, 21st in points, 12th highest AAV now. The fact it's probably going to age pretty good. I don't know. I actually think this is pretty good work. It's sticker shock, and it took me kind of 15-20 minutes. But then as I started to peel apart the numbers, I was like, no, I like this. And also, if you look, Hutz, at just the cost of the two Hughes brothers, Jack is on one of the best contracts in the NHL. You're getting Jack and Luke for a combined 17 mil. That's actually pretty good work.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I wonder what he's saying right now to his older brother there, just letting him know that he makes a bit more here. But I know that the next deal is going to be huge. It'll be interesting to see how they sync up as the contracts move forward. You're always the talk of Quinn trying to come in, getting all three of them together at some point across the NHL.
Yeah, Jack Hughes still has 5 more on that deal with an $8 million price tag. That is crazy. But let's talk a little bit. I mean, Hughes has an impact on Hutson, and Kaprizov has an impact on some other players as well. I don't think there's much of a line, and there were some Oilers fans today who were maybe holding out hope that hey, Kaprizov signed, that's the $17 million bar. Now McDavid's going to feel okay coming in at, 2 or 3 years and maybe 15 million, because then he can look to the PA and say, I'm justified in taking less because I didn't take the full term like a Kaprizov did. And McDavid, there's a line of thinking that, hey, maybe he is looking to take less to try help the Oilers keep this competitive window open. I don't think Connor McDavid's wired that way, though. I really don't think there's much correlation between the Kaprizov deal and McDavid. The only players who I think should be looking at the Kaprizov deal and taking anything from it are the wingers, and that's Kempe and Kyle Connor. But what do you make of the idea that Connor McDavid is, maybe feeling some pressure from the NHLPA to take a max term, max money deal, and that's why he was waiting for a Kaprizov to ink his deal first?
No, I don't think it affects at all. I think he's a totally different situation. I think for him, it's the fact of the matter is, he wants to see where Edmonton is headed, right? He's made that very clear that he wants to win. He wants to be on a team that is going to help him raise a Stanley Cup. And I think if he's taking that max huge contract, does that disable the team? Especially if you look at the guys that already signed in Edmonton. You look at Leon, you look at Nurse, you look at guys that have those big contracts, and Hyman being there. Is that debilitating to this team if he goes long term? So that would be a different sense in that matter. Even you look at the Jack Eichel, I think maybe Jack Eichel wakes up today with that Kaprizov contract and maybe he adds $1 million to his deal, because I think there's two sides to his game at center where, he is in the heart running. He is also a Selke sort of player. But there is more of that max deal for those kind of guys. With McDavid, I think it's a different unicorn, especially the fact that the last 2 years they've been to the Cup final. He's trying to push this team over the top. So maybe you see a little shorter term deal, to try to help this team instead of that max contract. But if I'm, even think of Kyle Connor in Winnipeg, what he's going to demand for a contract. Kempe, the wingers, there is a change in the landscape, but this is something that we need to adjust to. And I think right now, like you said, there is that little bit of that sticker shock wow to these contracts. But this is a new age with the way the cap is going, and who's making out real well is Pat Brisson right now. He's waking up. He got that deal done. He's got Eichel. He has the money rolling in. So it's going to be a different landscape for these agents as they negotiate contracts.
Yeah, and I mean, never mind this coming year's UFA class, and it's obviously a loaded one with a bunch of guys going into their contract years. But you look at 2 years from now, like it's Cale Makar, and then it's Austin Matthews, and like it's going to be kind of like quarterbacks in the NFL, where like every offseason you get a new guy who, even though he's not the best player in the league, a new guy setting the new benchmark for the highest paid player in the NHL. Like, I really don't think there's any player who's going to set a ceiling for anyone, even if it was Connor McDavid.
Yeah. And again, it's just timing, right? This is the main thing with hockey and majority of contracts is, what season are you having when it comes to term, right? So, and this is something that's going to be important for a lot of these superstars. And we're going to see the free agents that are coming up. There's always going to be new names. And as the cap grows, but the main thing to take away from all of this, whether it's your team or you're, judging the contract, is the NHL's in a good place and they're making money and players are making money and things are moving along steadily, Ty.
Yeah, I mean, if you want more proof of that, go look at Sportico. Just released their franchise valuations, and things are good in the NHL. Let's get to our third topic, then we'll get to our guest segment in a couple of minutes here. But a trade this morning, the Edmonton Oilers acquiring goaltender Connor Ingram from the Utah Mammoth in exchange for future considerations. Utah also keeping $800,000 of his contract. And if you're raising an eyebrow at this and going, whoa, why are they trading him? He was just on waivers. Well, this makes sense from a whole bunch of different perspectives. It's actually something I outlined last week on my Oilers Nation show. For Edmonton, it made no sense to claim Connor Ingram because then they have to keep him in the NHL and waive Calvin Pickard. And I don't think they want to disrupt their room in that way at all. Wait for him to clear, and then you go to Utah and you say, hey, he's $1.8 million. The Oilers couldn't have afforded a backup goalie at $1.8 million. They can afford a backup goalie at $1 million, though. So now that Ingram is cleared, the Oilers get the $800K retention from Utah. Utah, while yes, it would have been nice to have him totally off their books if he was claimed on waivers, he wasn't. You retain $800K, but you actually lose $1 million in real money. So again, $1 million your owner doesn't have to pay out. And the cap hit, dead weight, $800K. It's actually the same as if he was sitting in the minors. So it's no loss for Utah, really. It's a bit of a gain financially. For Edmonton now, they can take Ingram, put him right in Bakersfield, and then as soon as one of their two goalies struggles at some point in the season, they can point to Ingram, bring him up. He'd be the same cap hit as Calvin Pickard, and boom, it looks like the Oilers are doing something between the pipes. So now that I've detailed all of the boring parts of this transaction, let me ask you a more fun one, Hutz. Can Connor Ingram be an answer for the Oilers this season?
In the interim of an injury, I think if there's an injury and something happens, he can come in, he can step in. He's a guy that's played NHL minutes. He's been in tough situations. A guy who's kind of had to fight back in his career. You look at Nashville when he was there and he stepped away from the game. He had to take care of stuff off the ice. He came back. He's had a great year in Utah. But when I look at this, goalie and the way he plays, his abilities, I don't really see him much higher than a Calvin Pickard. What he's really going to bring to the table. I think there is stability with the experience. But that being said, at the end of the day, we're still a team with the Edmonton Oilers. All eyes are on Stuart Skinner. If they plan to get to the promised land, it's going to be him stepping it over the top. So you can never have enough depth in this position. We've seen it so many times throughout the NHL where guys get called upon. I've been in a system where I was number 5 when I was early in my career with the Chicago Blackhawks playing for the Toledo Walleye in the East Coast Hockey League. And next thing you know, I'm in the NHL playing in all 3 leagues that year. But that's just the way the position goes, right? You can be so far down the depth chart. But that being said, I still think there is some upside to Connor Ingram. I think there's a potential for him to, improve and play a little better and, kind of fine tune that. And sometimes just to change the landscape. So there's going to be a bit of demand on him, I think, in the American Hockey League to get his game back where it needs. But right now he's a bit of a safety net if someone gets hurt for me, Ty.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's a safety net. If someone starts playing bad, if someone gets hurt, you can at least, make it look like you're doing something and you didn't have to give up anything. It's future considerations. Financially, it's an even swap with Pickard's cap hit. So it made sense that the Oilers were the team to do this. He's also a Western Canadian boy. So again, we know he's gone through, a lot personally the last year. He was in the player assistance program as well. He had the death of his mother. So I think being close to home might be a good thing for Ingram if he does make it back to the NHL as well. Let's keep cruising along and get to our big segment for the day. We're heading out to Florida to chat with George Richards. Maybe we don't quite have George Richards yet. We're having a little bit of trouble potentially on the setup side of things. So we will talk with George in a couple of seconds here. But Hutz, why don't I just kind of throw you a couple of questions about the Florida Panthers? Obviously this is a team coming into the year back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. If anyone's earned the right for a down year, it's the Florida Panthers. And not to say that they're destined for one, but when you look at the injuries, Tkachuk out until the middle of the season, and then you lose Barkov for the whole year. Do you think this is going to be a step back year for the Panthers, or do you think they have enough depth?
It feels inevitable, right? I think with the Barkov deal, I think it would have been tough enough to begin this year coming back. We look at Tampa Bay. I guess we have that perfect kind of scale of what we seen Tampa Bay do not that long ago and getting back there and just being a little more fatigued come playoff time. And I hear, a lot of positive out of Florida, right? I think the way that they approach the game and the way they approach training camp, the season, peaking at the right times, making sure they're ready. But this is Aleksander Barkov, right? This isn't a guy that you can replace. He might be one of the best players arguably in the league when it comes to playoff hockey, defending on all sides of the puck. So I think with this hole is going to be the biggest question mark because, the Florida Panthers have depth. They have goaltending. They have defense. They have all the right pieces, all the returning guys. And you can talk about the 2-year Stanley Cup hangover and where they're going to be. But without Aleksander Barkov is a big, big question mark for me. And again, it's going to be tough to judge this team on the regular season because I think when you looked at them last year, they try to peak at the right times. But this is going to be a big, big mountain for them to climb without Aleksander Barkov. So I put them a little farther down the list, and I don't look for them to be back in the dance this year, Ty.
Yeah, I think going all the way is tough. I mean, they've been to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, and it's part of the reason why last year I was dead wrong. I know this, but I did pick them to lose in the first round because I was like, eventually you just run out of gas. And again, with the injuries piling up, maybe this is the year where they do. I wanted to ask you about between the pipes as well. They moved on from Spencer Knight last year to go and get Seth Jones. That trade worked out, I think, really, really well for both sides. Knight seems to be flourishing. Jones obviously helped them win their second Stanley Cup. And now they have Daniil Tarasov as the backup to a 37-year-old Sergei Bobrovsky. Is that a good enough backup for Bob, or are they at risk of having to play Bob 55, 60 times this year?
No, I'm a big fan. I think Tarasov's game is good, and I think he is a guy that has a lot of upside. And one thing that I value with a younger guy, right? He comes from a system in Columbus where he's playing behind Elvis Merlikins. And, he has a little more of a high-energy guy, a guy that speaks his mind, and not necessarily the best guy to be mentored under for a backup goalie, in my opinion. Where I think this change, going to play with Bob, being with the veteran guy, a guy who's done it all. He's won the Conn Smythe. He's won the Stanley Cups. He can, he's just a complete unbelievable goalie in that sense. So now you're around him day in, day out. And I think there's going to be so much upside to him. They have a veteran goalie coach. This is a chance for him to really develop his game, but protected. But in a sense where you're in Florida, you're in a better system. And he is a guy that is an electric goalie. Getting him dialed within the posts. When I say that, Ty, I mean, he's a little bit at times, all over the map. And I think playing in Florida, playing with Bob, being around that sort of system is going to help Tarasov a ton. So I look forward to what he can bring this year. And I think he is getting groomed to be the guy as Bob starts to take less minutes. I think you can protect his minutes a bit more, getting him ready to peak at the right time come playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, Tarasov so up and down in Columbus, and they obviously have a good future between the pipes out in CBJ. I was actually a little bit curious, and not that there was any reporting on this, but when the news broke that the Hockey Canada 5 were allowed to come back to the NHL, I looked at Carter Hart in Florida, and I was like, man, if he were to sign a 2-year deal there, tax-free state, there's talk that Hart wants to be somewhere where he's maybe out of the limelight a little bit. That would kind of be Florida. Like, that would make sense. I was really, really curious to see if Hart would land there for 2 years. Bob retires, it's Hart's crease. Like, that just made sense to me. It obviously, doesn't look like it's going to happen. They like Tarasov, but still, I wonder about the long-term future of Bob there. Like, how much more does he really have in the tank with 2 cup rings on his hand?
I know it's a lot too. And one thing we know about Bob, and something I've seen firsthand being around him and around the game NHL goalies, is the way that he trains. He doesn't really have an off switch, right? Where you think about some guys, you can get away from the game. Me personally, it felt like you played for those off days where he seems like a training freak. And at some point, something starts to wear down. I don't care how much you take care of yourself. There's just time. No one ever defeats time. So there's going to have to be a transition phase. But for Carter Hart, it's a good topic because he needs to go somewhere where he can play but be protected, right? I know there's been the talk of Carolina, talk of Vegas, where does he potentially land? But I think Tarasov has a lot of upside. Again, he's super, super athletic. So when he starts to hone himself in, I think playing behind a more of a veteran team and a little more predictable of a game is going to do wonders for Tarasov. And being around a veteran goalie, there's stuff that you just can't find on a contract or on a stat sheet, the value that brings to a young goalie.
Yeah. Again, one other storyline while we wrap up the Florida Panthers talk. I'm really curious to see what they get out of Brad Marchand this year. Like, again, you go back to that playoff run. Marchand was a Conn Smythe candidate. Like, he was so good. He's 37 years old. The regular season with Boston, he was taking a bit of a step back, and he got rejuvenated by going to Florida, and maybe that rolls in to, again, his 37-year-old season. But if there's another reason to be just a little bit cautious with the expectations in Florida, like, how does Reinhart produce with no Barkov? What does Bennett look like after getting his big ticket off a strong playoff run? And what are you getting out of 37-year-old Brad Marchand? Because I'm not sure it's 60 to 70 points. I think it might be 45 to 50 points.
Yeah, I agree. And again, you look at Sam Bennett, you brought him up. He was a guy that doesn't really produce in the regular season to begin with, right? He's always been a guy that's been that playoff factor, that little bit of an X factor. And obviously last year was that Cinderella run for him, during contract time. And again, I spoke of that earlier, the timing's so important. And as for Brad Marchand, he's coming off a season where, he had a ton of surgeries. He was very behind the ball. And when he was dealt out of Boston, we weren't even sure what we were going to see from him, where he had this rejuvenated run where there was that mix, Ty, for me, where you're playing on emotion, you're playing on adrenaline during that Stanley Cup run for Brad Marchand to think that, this is his last kick at the cat. So now to sign the 6-year contract and be expected to come in and play well without Barkov, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So, Sam Reinhart is a guy for me that I think can produce with anyone because of his intelligence on the rink and how smart he is, his hockey IQ. Sam, a guy that I got to spend 3 seasons with in Buffalo. He's a guy, maybe what he doesn't make up for in foot speed, he makes up for in smarts. But that being said, on the other side of the puck, no Barkov is really going to have a big issue with this Florida Panthers team moving forward. So it will be interesting to see how it, plays out in the Atlantic, because there's a lot of good teams, and Tampa Bay is not taking a step back this year, Ty.
Yeah, that's a good point there. All right, we are going to continue. Oh, I think we actually have George Richards ready to join us now. We can throw him a couple of Panthers questions. George, I'm happy we got it all sorted out. Appreciate you popping on to the show today. Let's start with, the Barkov news is heartbreaking from a bunch of angles. The fact he's got to miss the Olympics for a guy who's been robbed of that experience now in his career, that sucks. But has it put a damper on Panthers training camp here as they look for begin their path to a three-peat?
Yeah, I think it has to. Goodness. I think it has to put a damper on it for the Panthers, right? Because all of a sudden you're without Sasha Barkov. He's the best player on this team. He's the leader of this team, all those things, the things that he does on the ice. But If any team feels that it can, get past that, it's the Panthers. They feel that they're deep enough. And nobody's trying to replace him because they already know that you can't replace Sasha Barkov. So, like Paul Maurice says, we're just going to chip away at his responsibilities and, see if they can do it as a team.
Yeah, George, obviously, seeing him lost. I saw Paul Maurice talking to the media about you can be sad for one day and then we have to come back and go to work and do our thing. We start to peel back the layers of this Florida Panthers team. Who starts to pick up, the depth and who can really cover for Sasha Barkov, right? They obviously have the depth to get it done, but this is a guy that's very hard to replace.
Yeah, you're going to see a little bit, maybe a little more offense from Sam Bennett. You're going to see some expanded minutes for Anton Lundell. Maybe the third line. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, because when you look at what Sasha Barkov does in shutting down some of the best players the NHL has to offer, who else can do that? So I honestly do not know how you do it, because I mean he's a 3-time Selke winner for a reason. He's got all the offensive skill in the world. I mean, so it's going to be a challenge. So, we'll have to wait and see.
George, so on that note, obviously we talk about the goaltending and where this team is built, their depth up front. But on the back end, Seth Jones was such an important factor at the trade deadline. He came into this Florida Panthers. He was like the piece that they needed, I feel like, to push them over the top. What do we expect from Seth Jones this year and the decor of the Florida Panthers, now that the honeymoon phase is over and you're back into an 82-game schedule?
Yeah, I think the postseason, the playoff run that Seth Jones had was just eye-opening, and also just such a big boost for him, right? I mean, that he admitted that got him invited to the Team USA summer orientation camp. Now he might make Team USA based on what he did here with the Panthers. And he was just fantastic in the playoffs. I think having to come in and replace the suspended Aaron Ekblad for those final, whatever it was, 18 games of the regular season, and then the playoff games as well, really sped up his learning curve here with learning Paul Maurice's system and all that. And he hit the ground running in the playoffs and hasn't looked back since. So, yeah, I think that, having a full training camp, and he feels like he's been here forever. So Seth Jones has really fit in well with the Panthers and is a big piece of this. You talk about replacing Sasha Barkov. Some of their defensemen are going to have to do that as well.
Last one for you. I want to talk a bit about Sergei Bobrovsky. We hear about all these other players going into contract years and all the smoke and noise around them. Bob is going into a contract year. We haven't heard a lot, at least from an outsider perspective, about an extension. Then you have the flip side. I mean, he's 37. He's got 2 Stanley Cup championships. We saw Anze Kopitar say that it's going to be his final season. And, last year we had Fleury go do his farewell tour. What's your sense on Bobrovsky's future? Could this be his last year in the NHL, or do you think he's itching to keep things going?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the Panthers are getting that kind of vibe, or they wouldn't have traded Spencer Knight to Chicago. We talked to Paul Maurice last year, like, who's the, what are you guys looking at as the hierarchy? Excuse me. And he says it's Bob. He thinks Sergei Bobrovsky can play at the high level for another 4 or 5 years. And Florida really doesn't have a backup plan unless, Daniil Tarasov works his way into that, into what the Panthers hope he can be, but we don't know that yet. So no, I think, Sasha Barkov, Sergei Bobrovsky, excuse me. I don't see him playing for anybody other than the Panthers. I think he loves it here. He loves playing for this team. They'll get something worked out where I don't even think they need to get something worked out. They'll just have a deal and it'll be done.
George Richard's been covering the Panthers for north of 2 decades, covering the league for north of 2 decades. You can read his work, Florida Hockey Now, and at NHL.com. You got the Guards cap on. We're 38 minutes from first pitch. You think they keep their season alive tonight?
I've been a fan for a long time, so no, I don't.
I got the
being a Cleveland fan this long, no, we already had our playoffs. Getting there is there, So
they got the Edmonton connection. My boy Eric Sabrowski pitching out of the bullpen. Him and I grew up playing ball together. It's very cool to see an Edmonton boy pitching for him. So I got a soft spot for him. I hope they win today.
I do too. So there we go.
All right, there you go. Thanks, George. There you go, George Richards. Florida Hockey Now. You can find him on Twitter at George Richards. We tagged him in the show tweet as well. If you've been watching this show the last couple of years, you're probably already following George. Let's get to our daily face-off inbox question here, Huts. We got one in from, you guys always make me say dumbass names on this show. Portuguese Walrus said, what are we thinking for Makar? Is it going to be 13 mil? Huts, I think Makar's going to be Kaprizov plus. I think Makar might be 17, $18 million.
Yeah, he's got to be, right. The way this market is going and the way that the money is spent, you know, he's just the guy where I think with Nate McKinnon, you know, they obviously talk about taking a little bit less, you know, maybe he's just making sure that him and McKinnon have a negotiated deal where Nate can just take a touch more, because without those two, this team does not go. So Makar has got to be licking his chops at home, knowing the way this market is rolling, knowing that he is the best defenseman on the planet and what he's going to get paid. But I think you start to creep up into those numbers now. And again, like I said earlier, Ty, this is the new norm, right? I think there's an adjustment period. There is a wow factor, but this is the way the cap is going. This is the way that the structure is going. And these high-end guys are going to be able to call their shots and get what they need.
Yeah, and we had someone else in the chat. I scrolled past it and lost it, but they kind of said, like, is Kaprizov really $5 million better than Rantanen? And I think by making that argument, you're kind of making the point. Like, when Rantanen signed for 12, what were the naysayers saying? He's not worth as much as McDavid. He's not worth Nathan McKinnon money. No wonder the Avs had to let him go. And then here we go. It was Randy. Thank you. And then here we are 7 months later, and it's like, wow, what a value for Rantanen. And even Draisaitl, he gets signed, $14 million deal, highest paid player in the NHL by what, $750,000. And what are people saying? Well, he's no Matthews. He's the second best player on his team. All of this stuff. That Draisaitl contract doesn't kick in for another week. It's probably one of the best value deals in the league.
Yeah, it is right now. Waking up today, you know, if the Edmonton Oilers have to be happy that's done. But at the end of the day, it's what someone's going to pay you, right? It's like a good real estate market, right? You can say whatever you want it's going to be worth, but as long as you can come to and find those comparables, that's the way that I've been in these situations before. I remember my first contract after in Nashville, right? I'm a young guy. I just played my first full year in the league. David Poyle pulls me in an office, Ty, and he goes, hey, these are the guys that we think you're the same as. I was a deer in the headlights because I had no idea. I was like, hey, this is why I have an agent. But this is how the market works. They're going to find comparables. They're going to try to poke holes in it. And these players have a leg to stand on now as guys start to make more money. But this is the new norm. And again, whether you like it or not, there's always going to be that argument. But the league is built on superstars, and that's something we've seen day in, day out. If you don't have superstars, Ty, it's really hard to hold up in the NHL.
Speaking of Draisaitl and a whole bunch of superstars, Leon was the only player to score 50 goals last season. That is the topic of our daily bet for the day, brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. In front of you, Carter Hutton, I have the odds for players to score 50 goals next year. Draisaitl is number one on the list at plus 160. We only had one last year. I actually think there's a couple of really, really good spots here. Connor McDavid at plus 650. I actually jumped on this 3-4 weeks ago and got it at plus 1100. So the odds are cratering on this thing. But I like Matthews as well, plus 240. I think he's playing 82 games this year. I know there's no Mitch Marner feeding him the puck, but I still think Matthews can get to 50 goals. Is there anyone on this list from a value perspective, maybe higher up? Who do you like to net 50 next year?
You know what? For me, it's an old teammate I spent 4 seasons with, Tage Thompson. I just think with the snub from the Four Nations Cup and with the pressure that is going on in Buffalo for them to have a big start and start early, and for him looking to make that Olympic team, he is a guy that I think comes hot out of the gate. You know, obviously scored a huge goal in overtime for Team USA at the World Championships. I look for him to come out hard. He's a guy that can find the back of the net, and I think at that value right now for him, I think that's a good buy with the way Buffalo State is, where they're going to have to come out hot to try to keep pace in the Atlantic.
Never hit 50, but he's gotten close. 44 last year, 47 a couple of years ago. Let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time. And it was the farewell to end the farewell tour for Marc-Andre Fleury. I'll spare everyone my take on that and instead play a little video of a classic Marc-Andre Fleury prank to close out his time with the Penguins.
Are you waiting to get that reaction?
Yes.
He's still in the gym. Be waiting a while.
Are you kidding me? Hey, you know how much this car cost? You can't do it with.
It looks like you're a racing car. Number 29. Oh, the stripes.
Where's Flower?
Oh my God.
pretty good by Flowers. Did you get my car?
I think it looks good on mine. I'll keep it. How bad is it? That's a question. That's not that bad, actually. I was expecting way worse, to be honest with you. It's his day. I'm gonna leave him alone. I'll just remember it. That's all.
Huts, what did you make of that? Marc-Andre Fleury, he got to play in a final preseason game with the Penguins, and that was a cool moment.
It was a cool moment. And obviously I love the pranks. He's known for it, stuff throughout the years. You know, as I sit here and I watch that, not that I get choked up by any means, but the things you miss around the game, right? The locker room stuff, the fun that gets had off the rink. And what I do love, though, is I love Kevin Hayes checking out his car like he got. And I was like, you know, you're not part of the big three, Hayes. You've been there, you know, for a cup of coffee with Marc-Andre Fleury. But I love it. He's known as a prankster. I look back on some of my career, the stuff that I've seen and done, you know, guys that were always pulling stuff off. So it was good to see. And it was a great end and then a farewell for Fleury.
We're back tomorrow, right back here on the DFO YouTube. I think we're going to have the first of our insider friends joining us on the show as well. Huts, great stuff from you today. Excited to do roughly 220 more of these with you this season. Pat Pup behind the scenes was fantastic as well. George Richards, a gem for joining us. As always, everybody in the YouTube, thank you for your questions. Enjoy your Wednesday. Happy October. We'll see you back here tomorrow at noon Eastern. Hey, hockey fans, if you enjoyed that video, then make sure you hit the subscribe button right here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. We have you covered for everything you need. Exclusive interviews on The Sheet with Jeff Merrick, all the latest hockey news on Daily Faceoff Live, and you can always get your morning started with Johnny Lazarus and Colby Cohn on Morning Cup of Hockey. Don't miss a minute. Hit that subscribe button.